Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening to all the viewers joining across the world. We are going to start this amazing and exciting webinar just in a minute. I still see we have few of the attendees joining, so let's just wait for one more minute, and then we got to dive in this HR Process Advances webinar. All right. Again, a very warm welcome to all the viewers who have joined us across the globe. I'm very excited to welcome you all in this exciting webinar of HR Process Advances, Greater Complexity and Value. Now, before we proceed further, just wanted to highlight a couple of housekeeping rules. This webinar is being recorded, so in case if you want to relive the magic again, you'll have the access details very soon. Next, we have an exciting and engaging Q&A session planned with our speaker at the end of the webinar. So feel free to post your question and answers in the Q&A box on the top left corner, and then we'll take them at the end of the session. A very famous line in the Spider-Man series that with great power comes great responsibility. And in our times, it's the great technology which brings great values along with the risk. Myself, Siddharaj Sarvaiya, I'm a program manager at Azilen, and I would be moderating this webinar today. Nowadays, a company usually would have around 12 to 16 HR products integrated into their ecosystem. Now, that's just a part of the challenge. The biggest challenge is to make them seamlessly invisible for their employees, so it does not look like an overhead. And that's where the complexities start arising. As we see past 6 to 12 months, we have a rapid advancement in the AI, data analytics, increase in the job mobility, and along with the shadow of slowdown, that's where the companies are compelled to rethink and redesign and reskill their talent pool. So with that said, let's take a sneak peek on what we have for today's webinar with our knowledge cards. Let me introduce you to our speaker today. Just like our session is as vast, Steve, welcome to the webinar.
Thanks, Sid.
So Steve has 30 years of experience in all the HR tech processes and technology. He has been HCM product strategist, along with a speaker and a founder. Steve, welcome. Good morning.
I appreciate it, and thanks everybody for joining.
So
Always
Steve,
good to be with you, Sid.
I have a quick question, Steve. So we all believe you are superhuman. You produce so much of content almost every day, knowledgeable content. You are a speaker. We see your conferences, webinars very frequently. So how do you manage all these, and how do you wear all these hats at once, and that too with an amazing smile on your face always? So tell us the secret.
Well, the smile is authentic, and I guess the passion is authentic too. I appreciate the question. The word passion is almost a cliche these days. It shouldn't be, but passion for your work, passion for your family, passion for life in general. So let me take the cliche a little bit further. And more of a suggestion or tip. I was very, very fortunate early on in my career, right out of grad school. I started reporting to a CHRO that was had the most passion for the HR profession of anybody I've ever met. I wound up reporting to him twice at two different Wall Street firms. He actually passed away last year, but the passion that he exuded, his name was Ed Weinmayer. The last name is Weihenmayer. Some of you may know, have heard of Ed's son, Eric Weinmayer, Eric with a K. Certainly the passion that I picked up from Ed, his son picked up, because Eric, the son, who's now in his 40s, was the first totally blind person to climb Mount Everest. And he went on to climb many other peaks and other continents. So I was very fortunate. And Ed was very passionate about moving the HR profession and discipline forward. And it has stayed with me my whole career. So my advice very quickly is work for somebody that has passion, work with teammates that have passion, and you'll be in good shape.
Great. So now that the secret is out, Steve, stage is all yours, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks, and thanks everybody again for joining. All right, so let me start with what I coined a term here, the ascension test. The ascension test really refers to a question. And the question, in my mind, is really the guidepost or lens that should be used by a customer organization, a customer of HR Tech, in determining where their priorities should lie. What capabilities will have the biggest impact on their organization? So the ascension test, very simply, is what capabilities will allow my organization to ascend the ranks within my industry vertical, right? Think of it in those terms. And if you do, as you see in this slide before you, cost savings, efficiency gains, capturing efficiencies, certainly these are good outcomes. But maybe somebody in the audience has, in their experience, heard of an organization that ascended the ranks within their industry based on saving money. I personally have never. It's still an excellent outcome, cost savings and efficiency gains. But you see the x-axis on the bottom, strategic value of outcomes. The greater the strategic value, the greater the chance of ascending the ranks. And that's the way I've always looked at it. So devote more resources as the strategic value increases. And if you skip over to the right side, in my experience, and Sid did me a favor and made me younger and said 30 years, this is actually I don't mind dating myself. It's always good to be able to date yourself. This is my 40th year in HCM, HR, and HR Tech. So I say devote the most resources to the areas that are going to allow you to ascend the ranks and have the most strategic value. And some of those areas include elevating organizational agility. Why? Because we live in very uncertain times, unpredictable times, very fluid times. Organizations that could be out in front of both risks and opportunities are the ones that are more successful in uncertain and unpredictable times. One other strategic value outcome that is on the top of my list, and it's super easy to quantify, is improving employee productivity. How do you quantify it? Well, a standard metric for that happens to be revenue per employee. And if you have any appreciably sized organization, and then you multiply, let's say it's 1,000 employees or 5,000 employees, you multiply by even a 5% very modest uptick in employee productivity. Let's say you go from 100K per employee to 105K per employee. That additional 5K times the number of employees, it's going to translate into millions in value creation. That's why I've always included productivity measured conservatively and in the business cases that my teams have worked on. We can go to the next slide. All right, so this is one of the key pillars here of the talk is the evolution of the HR Tech domain. And because I've been at it for a while now, and those of you that were colleagues over the years in the 80s and 90s, we all know that the industry was extremely process-centric, right? Not experience-centric, as we've gotten in the last 5 or 8 years, but process-centric. And why is that so? Whether it be workforce planning, recruiting, learning, performance, compensation, succession planning, et cetera. Why was it process-centric? I have 2 theories on that. One is that best of breed solutions predated integrated talent management suites. And the best of breed solutions or point solutions were very process-centric, right? For recruiting or learning, et cetera. But the other assertion that I would make as to why we started out this way in the 80s when the industry really was being, emerging, is because typically a process owner had the budget and the salesperson that was selling the HR Tech was going to the process owner that had the budget. And in those days, CHROs were not very attuned, in my opinion, to the fact that it was definitely in the best interest of the organization to link together seamlessly all the HR processes. So they focused on the process that had the most pains or pain points, and the HR software company or HCM software company sold to that process owner. That was good and bad. The downside was we were too process centric for some years. It really wasn't until about 10 to 15 years later, approaching year 2000, when we started to go from point solutions to suites, to talent management suites. And the other thing to point out here is the other transition that, in my view, when I look at it kind of, retrospectively, the other point is we went from being employer centric or skewed toward the agenda of the employer, the needs and interests and goals of the employer, to being much more employee focused as well. And really, it's almost like an artificial dichotomy to say, well, you have to be one or the other, because mature organizations and mature executives know that what's good for the employer is good for the employee, and vice versa, right? So we now went through this period of having more of a balancing, that we were very cognizant of the need to balance employer needs, interests, and goals with employee needs, interests, and goals. That was much more desirable of an outcome. Then we got into this extending beyond processes to experiences. When did this happen? Roughly, in my opinion, when we started to talk about employee experience, much more focus on candidate experience, eventually line manager experience. That's, relatively speaking, more recent. It's probably the last 7 or 8 years. I wrote my first piece on employee experience about 6-7 years ago. And so the next one is bots. HR departments are in the service delivery business to their stakeholders and cohorts. So we started to use bots in different ways and kind of different flavors or classes of bots, if you will. You have chat bots, you have virtual agents that are able to detect and converse and parse out language, but also robotic process automation, right? RPA for repeatable processes that are predictable. In the payroll arena, RPA has been leveraged quite heavily in the last few years. The next one is pretty much one of my favorites, is AI and ML in HCM. Of course, as we know, we're really talking about ML. Because most of the AI capabilities or use cases out there are really about machine learning. So I'm going to come back later in the presentation to give you some categories of use cases and very concrete examples. But AI and ML was definitely ushered in a new era of amazing and sophisticated capabilities in HCM. Let's just say that one of those categories of use cases I'm going to come back to is personalization. And now we've kind of, in the last 5 years, gotten into hyper integrated personalization. So it's almost like the intersection of integrated talent management and ML driven personalization. Why do we personalize? Same reason why you want to personalize a customer experience. When the customer feels like they are known, they are a known entity, you know their preferences, you know their interests, you know what they bought last time. Call it the Netflix model, whatever you want to call it. But for decades, the customer experience was top of mind for businesses, particularly in retail. And finally, the employee experience caught up. It's the most logical analogy in the world. Skills intel versus skills science. Skills intel, I define it as actionable insights and information on skills. But when you kind of cross the threshold to skills science, which fortunately many organizations are taking advantage of vendor investments in skills science. For me, the distinction is skills science is systematically arriving at those insights. And those insights are validated, and you know what the consequences and likely outcomes of those insights are. Now you're getting into skills science. Planning finally gets adequate attention. I've personally been an advocate for improving planning capabilities in the world of HR tech for decades now. And I guess we could say that workforce planning or strategic workforce planning and compensation planning are the two areas where planning in recent years has become much more robust, thankfully. And lastly, enabling, this is kind of not a logical progression from the others. But the last one here is so important. Anybody that's looked at research over the last 20 years or so on corporate restructurings, business transformations, HR transformations, M&As, anybody that's looked at that research knows that those events are so telling in terms of, how the organization comes out of it is really going to determine their future trajectory. So they are fraught with risk and they are ripe with opportunity. And so pivotal moments for the organization are some of those events that I just spoke about. And now we're seeing technology, HR technology, start to highlight what are those risks, the people risks, like retention risk, like productivity lapses, et cetera, and how do we deal with them? What are the mitigating factors? So there you have my HR tech evolution in however many minutes that took. All right, so now we go to extending beyond processes to stakeholder experiences. As I mentioned before, the key stakeholders in our world being HR tech, are of course candidates, employees, contractors, and line managers, as well as external partners. So this slide only deals with the employee experience. I came up with my alternative ERP acronym, ERP standing in this case for engagement, retention, and productivity. Came up with this 20 years ago when I worked with PeopleSoft and was the spokesperson for PeopleSoft. In any event, so these are what I view as the primary employee experience drivers and how they connect or link with engagement, retention, and productivity outcomes. I'm not going to go over in the interest of time every single one here, but for example, HCM systems and tools. Now let's stay on that slide. We go back to that slide. HCM systems and tools, for example. Since that's that's the topic of the day. In my contention is, based on my years of experience, yes, they will definitely have a major impact, a demonstrable impact on engagement and on productivity, probably not so much on employee retention. I think culture influences that more. I think your direct supervisor influences that more. Compensation and benefits, similarly, in my view, absolutely impacts retention, more in a negative sort of sense, right? If we feel we're not being paid based on what we're delivering, our value, the market rates, et cetera, we're going to leave. Does compensation drive engagement and productivity? Not as much, in my view. So anyways, that's just another framing we could look at. We can go to the next slide. All right, so I got together with, I was actually visiting Azilen Technologies about, 8 weeks ago, and we started to look at this relationship between complexity and business value, right? So complexity and business value, and what I did was I just took some of these kind of snippets, if you will, of capabilities and plotted them on an X and Y axis. The X axis is business value. So if we just zoom in the upper right, in my view, based on my experience, something like the opportunity marketplace is a capability that, while the business value is clear, what is an opportunity marketplace capabilities? Many vendors have it now. It's relating skills to other skills, to jobs, to projects, et cetera, to employee career goals, right? So it's really relationships with skills at the center. Skills inferences 2.0, it's my own term. So if we think about the evolution of skills science, it really started with inferring what skills are the most relevant skills from looking at a job description, from looking at an employee profile, what skills are what skills surface when the system looks at an employee profile. But now 2.0, in my view, is that we're able to look at employee recognition that employees give each other, and the system can potentially infer skills from that as well. Sentiment analysis is the themes and the topics that are coming up in anonymized emails. Really has a good way to plug into What are people thinking about and feeling in the organization? Again, complexity pretty high, but more and more HR tech vendors have this capability. And conversely, on the other side of the coin, you go to the lower left, something like importing compensation market data right into the compensation management or salary increase or bonus process. The business value clearly is there. We could probably do that with an Excel spreadsheet. The complexity is pretty low. We can go to the next slide. All right, so, obviously, analytics is also growing up, just like HR technology has been growing up. And I'm not going to get into all of these, but these are some of the high impact analytics that my teams worked with over the years. And when I talk to CHROs, there's a lot of kind of resonance when we talk about these themes. So just a couple of them, right? What are the best sources of talent for different jobs? When we talk about sources, we could be talking about agencies, internal referrals. Is the industry the best source? If we source from the industry, is that the best source? Obviously, this is leveraging machine learning. Similarly, if we look at the right side, for which jobs does the best available talent matter most? And what's the implication of that? Once we have that really key piece of insight, we know that we may have to pay above market rates for those jobs, right? I'm going to mention one more here, which is one of my favorites. And someday I'll probably have a talk just about this. Opt-outs is candidates that we've invested in that opt out during the process. They may opt out after the second or third interview. They may go all the way to the end, get the offer, and not accept it. It's very costly. And so it's important to look at what is going on. What are the correlates of those opt-outs? Do we have hiring managers that are not paying attention or showing up late for the interview, et cetera? You can go to the next slide, Sid, but I want to say two other things quickly about analytics. One is make sure that you test your premises. Even when you have an insight, it seems to be holding up, it has some shelf life. Sometimes the premises are just no longer valid. So here's an example. There was a retail store in Europe, in Paris, that I read about years ago, that for many years, and it was successful, they thought that having physically attractive people, men and women, selling cosmetics and perfume and so forth, that was the best for the organization. Now they would sell more when the people selling it were attractive. Well, guess what? They tested that with some other correlates, and they found that they actually sold even more when the person selling was more knowledgeable in the product. So check out your premises, validate them over time. And one more thing, don't overlook the obvious in terms of analytics. Walmart years ago collected a ton of data. They had a data warehouse. And after spending a lot of money, they found out, well, when we put diapers on sale, beer sales go up. In my opinion, they could have sat in a room and come up with that one in 5 minutes. It has a sexist undertone that the man is dispatched or the husband is dispatched, and he has his agenda when he goes to the supermarket. But still, it seems like an obvious one to me. Okay, so this change management area is one that I have been very passionate about, to use that P word again. And one of the reasons why is because I think it's been a big white space in the HR tech domain. I think there's a ton of opportunity for HR tech vendors, purveyors of these systems, to focus on change management and break it down into what are the specific activities, such as the one on the top, assessing organizational readiness. Anybody that knows anything about change management knows the beginning of a change management cycle is assess org readiness. How do you assess organizational readiness for the change? It has skills component. It has an attitude component. Are people receptive to the change? Are there other projects going on or strategic initiatives that are going to compete for the same people? That's all part of readiness. And readiness is the front end, just like sustaining the change is the back end. Organizational network analysis, ONA, is really looking at relationship data. Who influences whom is quite important in the context of change management, right? Speed of execution versus risk level analysis. This is highly complicated. I haven't seen any vendor that has this, but there probably is one. But what I'm talking about here is, let's say you have a big business transformation exercise. Think about IBM many years ago that went from being the biggest mainframe company to being the biggest consulting firm. Somewhere they devoted a lot of time to what's the cycle time for us to achieve this monumental transformation. And so you have to look at what's the risk if you rush it, okay? And one other, I'll just mention one other here. Compensation and benefits harmonization is more pertinent in the world of M&A. When you're bringing together organizations, you need to look at comp and benefits harmonization. That's part of the change management exercise, right? And then how long does it take and what's the incremental path to get consistency across the organizations? All right, AI and ML and HCM. Next slide. So you have Josh Bersin was my boss back in 2010. A number of other industry analysts also worked with us back then. And recently, very recently, Josh came up with something I thought was very interesting. So I'm citing it here. What he conceptualized as 3 generations of vendors in terms of how they're leveraging and incorporating AI into their portfolio. AI added on, AI built in, and built on AI. I thought it was very interesting. And you could look for his article on that. On the right is Josh, one of Josh's many proteges, a guy by the name of Steve Goldberg. And this is my AI and HCM framework. 5 categories of use cases. I spent 2 years looking at AI or potential AI and HCM use cases. And those are the 5 categories I came up with. Predict, could be, it's vast. All the things you can predict now with machine learning, engagement going in the wrong direction, productivity going up or down, et cetera. Predict whether a job offer is going to be accepted. Personalization is a horizontal. It should apply across the HCM value chain. Insights are not that useful unless you have prescriptive action. Prescriptive action is based on what's worked in the past, best practice in your operating context. Understand why our job offers are not being accepted. And curate, in my view, relates to curating resources so you can be more productive. And that might be people resources, content, tools, etc. Next. We're going to get to the Q&A in 5 minutes. Okay, so AI ML creates opportunities in workforce planning. Obviously, a big part of workforce planning is skill gaps. What are the skill gaps? And that will change as business plans and priorities change, obviously. So machine learning, again, looking at predicting, if you look at my framework, predicting one of those 3 Ps, predict, personalize, prescribe. We're predicting what will the skill gap be or not be if business plans and priorities change, right? Learning and development, the Netflix model, which everybody uses, the learning experience platforms. If I like this content, if it was relevant to me, then serve me up some other content just like the other thing. Succession planning is about bench strength. So when do we know that the bench strength for C-level jobs is sufficient? But I hasten to point out something that I kind of popped into my head many years ago. Let's not just look at the top 2 or 3 levels in an organization, C-level and 1 or 2 levels below when we talk about succession planning. Let's talk about it in the context of whatever, any person that leaves the organization that causes disruption, you should have bench strength for that person. I guarantee you, if you've invested millions in a system and after 5 or 10 years, the whole project team left except for 1 person, that person is a key employee. You need bench strength for that person. And again, personalization, prescriptive, curating, understanding They go across this spectrum. The last one I'll mention, which is not intuitively obvious, maybe payroll management. That was my my CHRO that I reported to right out of school. He wanted me to get immersed in every HR process, starting in payroll. So if we had machine learning back then, we would have known where are the errors going to be. Well, in payroll, the errors are typically where you have off-cycle transactions, people getting hired or terminated in the middle of a cycle, people getting a raise in the middle of a cycle. So that's what the machine would tell you. Here's somebody, a line manager that's hiring people or letting them go in the middle of a circle, in the middle of a pay cycle. You're probably going to have more errors there. You need to focus more attention there. Next slide. Okay, we talked about this. You already gave that definition. And here's, I'm going to segue from skills to organizational agility, but I'm going to stay on this slide for 1 minute. These are some very, very impactful, in my view, analytics use cases that relate to my favorite theme. When I was at Unleashed recently, I spoke about organizational agility. I just think it's so critical. And the organizations that can elevate organizational agility, it's almost a guaranteed path to a more successful outcome as an enterprise. So identifying skills needed the most as business plans and priorities change, right? Knowing, here's an interesting one also, not intuitively obvious. What proficiency level or competency level is needed for somebody to be considered a viable resourcing option? You don't need an expert in every situation. And when somebody needs to be at another level of competency or proficiency, what's the ramp up time, right? This is really critical in the realm of organizational agility. As you're pivoting strategically, operationally, et cetera, you need to understand what are the cycles to get from one place to the other, what are the risks, inherent risks, et cetera, people risks to be managed, et cetera. Again, when we talk about addressing skill gaps, very useful to leverage machine learning to let us know this skill gap is going to take 3 days to address and mitigate versus this one may take 3 months. Next slide. So just continuing on the org agility theme, how do I define it? The ability to be out in front of both business risks and business opportunities. How? By picking up on cues and signals from surveys, from sentiment analysis, from feedback from customers, et cetera, employees, employee reviews. You're going to get a bi-directional discussion going on there. The 3 A's of organizational agility that you'll read about in the literature, the 3 A's are anticipate, adapt, and act. And they all have to be done fairly quickly if you're going to be pivoting, because it's not just the ability to pivot, it's pivot, knowing the direction to pivot and doing it on a timely basis. Next. And I'm just going to mention one thing on this slide, which again, I think is maybe more subtle, and is in the lower left. Make the invisible visible. What I mean by that in the context of organizational agility and the ability to pivot operationally or strategically, what are some things that are, for all intents and purposes, invisible that you want to use technology to make them more visible? Something I call latent competencies. What are the skills and competencies somebody has, but they're invisible to the people around them because they're not relevant to their job? Okay, that's making the invisible visible. What are some risks, retention risk, et cetera? What are relationships where you have people influencing others, the different types of influencers? If I have a very good friend and I leave, that person may leave as well. If I was on a project and the project was successful, I think it's important to know who else was on that project. Who did I team up with well? Last one on the upper right, HR should be a hub for research and experimentation, period. End of story. Are we ready for Q&A? Let me see what we got here. What's next? This is important, and I wrote so when I visited Azilen, headquartered as Azilen Technologies in Ahmedabad, India, took me a while to pronounce that right when I was there. I asked one of the executives, you guys use next gen as a phrase. You use next gen software development, HCM software development, next gen. What does it mean? Let's dimensionalize it. What does it break down into? These are the three things. Starts with the right mindset, empathy toward how the user's going to use the technology, why they're going to use it, etc. Where will the challenges be in using it? And have that, if you shift to the right-hand side, have the dynamic feedback loop about, are they getting value from the product? Does the product have to be adjusted in some way? The back end, the front end, etc. How it interoperates with other products, because we know the typical HR organization has 10 to 15 HCM systems and or tools. How is it interoperating? It's key to the user experience, obviously, and recognizing that every end user might be different. Every end user might be different in terms of how often they're using the product, how they use the product, why they're using the product. This is all part of next gen. It's a lot of mindset. A lot of it is mindset. And frankly, and you'll get the slide deck because I want to get to the questions, but modernization, in short, requires, or next gen HCM, it also requires an understanding that and a premise that there's a lot of harmonization and unification going on. All of these dimensions, all of these attributes of the platform need to be harmonized and unified, whether it be data model, architecture, talent profiles, job families, competencies, which is a linchpin between talent management processes, just like job families. All of these components need to be harmonized. That's a big part of the complexity. Next. Yeah, so let me just say, I'm just gonna say two sentences about Azilen. Over the years since I left PeopleSoft, I've worked with over 60 HCM software companies as an advisor, thought leader, etc. I've never worked until I met Azilen with an IT services offshore product engineering company. It's the first one I've ever worked with. It's the first one I ever wanted to work with. And there are a couple of reasons that are really compelling when I went there. And it's not only, I would say, one of the largest offshore IT services organizations, product engineering organizations in the world, that's 100% exclusively focused on the HR tech domain, which is pretty unusual. But the culture at Azilen blew me away. And that's why they're a certified best place to work. That's why they were invited to and they do sponsor various HR and HR tech events. So I'm a big fan of this company. You could see some of the metrics here. Next. Are we up to this? We're going to have to go fast on the Q&A. Let's go. What do we have coming in?
Yes, Steve. So now we are to the most exciting part of the webinar. I have two questions. I'll start with the question. Okay. So the first question is, for those organizations that are putting together a business case for investing in an HR technology, can you give us a few recommendations based on your experience?
Yeah, you have to. This is common sense, forgive me, but you have to go to the area of the business that is likely going to help you fund the rollout of new HR tech. I did it and my teams did it when I was in financial services. And we went to the most successful parts of the business and we said, look, tell us, we want to learn your pain points. And it's going to basically be our North Star when we go out and start evaluating products. And then we really crafted the business case. I know it's common sense around the area and the pain points that ultimately would fund the project. So that's, and of course, we want it to be as quantifiable and conservative in our assumptions as possible.
So the next one is more in lines with one of our slides where the question is, Steve, you talked about the HR tech advances and opportunities. Can you name one or two top product advances and one or two top opportunities which you see?
Well, that's a good one. Okay, CRM, not customer relationship management, but candidate relationship management. Obviously, as we know, as most of us know, this relates to people, passive candidates. They're not looking. They're not in the market. Why aren't they looking? In many cases, it's because they don't need to look. They're in demand. They're taken care of where they are, etc. So to reach out, presumably, to some of this best talent out there, we have to be very effective in candidate relationship management, and personalization is the key. The messages, the content that we push to them, the timing of how often we contact them, that all has to be reflecting what we know about the drivers of that person. Are they compensation motivated? Do they want to work from home 100% of the time, et cetera? So candidate relationship management has become very sophisticated. I'll mention a couple of others in the recruiting space, which is where I think a lot of the advances have been. Just in the last couple of weeks, I've talked to vendors, emerging vendors, that one of which had talk to apply, not even type, talk to apply. Another one had recruitment marketing using very easy to use video to showcase people in the organization to entice people to want to work there. Another company I work with has a widget that is embedded right into the job description and job opening, so the person can know, the candidate can know right there the degree to which they're a good match for the job. So a lot of great advances there. Opportunities, as I said before, planning and change management are two areas that, to me, are the two biggest opportunity areas.
Right. So next one is, are there any specific names which comes to your mind that are delivering great business values?
Well, I would lose some friends and probably some business on the vendor side if I started to name names. I have respect for so many vendors. So I'm just going to answer it this way. The vendors, I believe there's a correlation. If you look at the vendors who are making it easy for customers to absorb and digest new releases, have empathy, as we talked about before, as part of one of the kind of tenets of next gen HCM, as Azilen and I define it, is empathy for the end customer. So don't just throw a new release over the transom. Make sure the customer is prepared in terms of change management, skills, etc. The vendors that are very, very good as a core competency in interoperating, their platforms have to be agnostic to other systems that they're interoperating with, the architectures, the data models, user experiences. And lastly, vendors that don't just sell product, but they educate and they facilitate learning across the customer community. If you have hundreds of customers, well, the onus is on you, and you really should be bringing their best practices to bear and educating, the portfolio of customers that you have. Do we have time for one more or no?
We can take a couple of more. I think we still have time. So this is the one interesting one. Can you talk about the relationship between HR tech process sophistication and the type of companies that are availing themselves of these new levels of sophistication, and if any industry size is relevant?
Yeah, that is a good one, and I would say my quick answer would be, if I had to, reduce it to pushing a button is irrelevant or not, what is the most relevant? I would say whichever customer organizations have done the best job at listening to their stakeholders. It's irrespective of industry, it's irrespective of company size. The ones that are listening and then have a very kind of proven process for taking what they heard, the sum total of what they heard from all the internal stakeholders and external stakeholders, and matching it up with the offerings in the market and see which is the best fit. So it's not a matter of industry or size of organization, et cetera. It's a matter of who's listening and who's taking the result of that process and and has an effective process for matching it up with the options out there. And typically it's not one platform. As I said, we're talking about most customer organizations have an ecosystem. My friend Stacey Harris, in her landmark study every year on customer patterns, every year identifies the typical pattern is over 10 HCM systems in a typical organization. So it's not just matching it up to one product in the market, it's matching it up to the totality of your whole infrastructure. I hope that made some sense.
Sure. This is the last one, and I'm sure you are hearing this for the first time. ChatGPT. What's the long-term and short-term impact on the HR business of ChatGPT?
Okay. I would say, yeah, and other people have talked about this. I'd say short-term job descriptions can be generated very easily, much more efficiently with ChatGPT. Even guidance, what to do about some analytics and some insights that have been highlighted for us. Because over time, ChatGPT will learn, well, if turnover is higher than it was last quarter, here's 3 places to look. An extension of that is the longer term. The longer term part of my answer is really knowledge management and having a repository of best practices that are specific to that organization. We all must remember that every operating context is a little bit different and a little bit unique, right? So I think longer term, we're going to see best practices being brought to bear. A friend of mine years ago in corporate HR used to say, well, best practice is the practice that works best. And what he meant by that was in that organization. I think ChatGPT over time will learn what practice works best in that organization. Well, I think we're out of time. And sorry if I went 2 minutes over, but I want to really, really thank everybody that joined. Thank my buddy Sid, and thank Azilen for a great collaboration. I love working with you guys.
Thank you so much. This was a very amazing and knowledgeable seminar. We could not cover everything in today's webinar, so hopefully we'll come up with many more in the future. And with that, we are end of this webinar. As you can see, we are having a busy next couple of months. We will be showcasing and presenting Azilen at many of the upcoming conferences. The most closest one is the Collision. So you can find us there. We're really happy to connect with you, meet you in person, and also showcase some of our best product engineering examples. So with that, thank you everyone. Have a great day ahead. Thank you, Steve.
Bye everybody.
Thank you.